Hello there, and welcome to this quiet corner where sleep meets mystery and science dances with the impossible. Tonight we're not talking about ordinary dreams, the kind where you show up to work in your underwear or chase after buses that never stop. We're diving into something far stranger, something that sits right at the edge of what we think we know about the sleeping mind. Can two people actually share the same dream? I know. It sounds like something pulled from a science fiction movie or whispered about in late-night conversations. But here's the thing. This isn't just campfire folklore or wishful thinking. This is a question that has quietly captivated researchers, puzzled neuroscientists, and challenged everything we assume about the privacy of our own consciousness. Because what if the boundaries between minds aren't as solid as we think? What if in that strange liminal space between waking and sleeping, something remarkable happens? Before we go any further, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and whether you've ever had a dream that felt shared, that felt like someone else was there with you in ways that couldn't be explained by coincidence. Drop a comment if this resonates with you, because what we're about to explore might just change how you think about the 8 hours you spend unconscious every night. The phenomenon we're investigating tonight goes by several names: shared dreaming, mutual dreaming, parallel dreaming, dream telepathy. Each term carries its own weight, its own implications about what might actually be happening when two people wake up with remarkably similar dream experiences. And while the scientific community remains deeply divided, the reports keep coming. Detailed accounts from people who have never met, describing identical dream landscapes, couples who wake up having navigated the same impossible architecture, friends separated by thousands of miles who find themselves in matching dreamscapes. These aren't vague similarities, mind you. We're talking about specific details. The same curved staircase leading nowhere, the same talking animal delivering the same cryptic message, the same sky that shifts colours in the same sequence, the kind of precision that makes even skeptical researchers pause and wonder if there's something here worth investigating. Now, if you're like most people, your first instinct is probably to dismiss this as coincidence. After all, humans share common experiences, common fears, common symbols. We're exposed to similar media, similar stories, similar cultural touchstones. Isn't it natural that our dreams might overlap in content? That's exactly what mainstream science has been saying for decades, and there's solid reasoning behind that perspective. But here's where things get interesting. When researchers actually started collecting and analysing these reports, patterns emerged that were harder to explain away. The University of Minnesota conducted one of the most comprehensive studies on mutual dreaming experiences, analysing over 100 detailed dream narratives from people claiming to have shared their dreams with others. What they found was striking. The similarity ratings for dream content were remarkably high. When researchers evaluated the settings, themes, characters, events, and objects described in these paired dreams, the average similarity scores were all above 4 on a 5-point scale, where 5 indicated identical content. That's not just casual resemblance, that's near mirror matching. Even more intriguing was the pattern of relationships between the dreamers. 42% of these shared dreams occurred between relatives, 27% between close friends, another 27% between romantic partners. Only 4% involved people who didn't know each other well. The dreams seemed to follow the invisible threads of human connection, clustering around the relationships that mattered most. And here's something that really challenges the coincidence theory. 48% of these shared dreams happened when the dreamers were in completely different locations. They weren't sleeping in the same house, breathing the same air, or influenced by the same immediate environment. They were separated by distance, yet somehow their sleeping minds seemed to be visiting the same impossible places. The timing patterns were equally fascinating. These shared dream experiences didn't seem to occur during periods of closeness and intimacy. Instead, they clustered around times when the dreamers were feeling separated, distant from each other, as if the dreaming mind was reaching across space to maintain connection when waking life felt disconnected. This isn't new territory, by the way. The question of whether minds can communicate across distance during sleep has been dancing around the edges of science for over a century. Sigmund Freud himself wrote about telepathic dreaming back in 1922, though he remained deeply skeptical. He'd never experienced a shared dream personally, and had never encountered evidence of mutual dreaming in any of his patients. His conclusion was characteristically cautious. The connection between telepathy and dreams couldn't be proven, but it couldn't be disproven either. His contemporary Carl Jung took a different approach entirely. Jung's theory of the collective unconscious raised the possibility of a shared mental space that connects all of humanity, a kind of psychological substrate where individual minds might occasionally overlap or intersect. It's a beautiful, poetic idea, though one that's incredibly difficult to test with the tools of empirical science. The real scientific investigation began in the 1960s and 70s, when researchers at the Maimonides Medical Center in New York decided to bring shared dreaming into the laboratory. Their approach was elegantly simple and rigorously controlled. They would separate two people, a sender and a receiver, into distant rooms in their sleep lab. The sender would randomly select an art print from a sealed collection, something they'd never seen before. Then, throughout the night, while the receiver slept, the sender would concentrate on transmitting the image. Near the end of each REM period, when dreaming is most intense, researchers would wake the receiver and ask for a detailed dream report. These reports were transcribed and later given to independent judges who had no knowledge of which art prints had been used. Their job was to match the dream descriptions with the images, working blind to avoid any bias. The results were, well, they were remarkable. For each study, the ratings given to the actual target image and dream transcript combinations were significantly higher than those given to incorrect pairings. The statistical odds against this happening by chance were substantial. It looked for a brief moment like science had finally captured dream telepathy in controlled laboratory conditions. But here's where the story gets complicated, because replication is the gold standard of scientific research. If a phenomenon is real, other researchers should be able to repeat the experiments and get similar results. And that's where the Maimonides findings began to unravel. When independent laboratories tried to replicate the dream telepathy experiments, the results were mixed at best and often completely negative. Richard Wiseman, a psychologist and noted skeptic, participated in a carefully designed replication attempt. After monitoring about 20 volunteers for several nights, the study found no evidence supporting telepathic dreaming. None. The failure to consistently reproduce the earlier positive results contributed to growing scientific skepticism about the entire phenomenon. Yet the reports keep coming. Not from laboratories now, but from real life. From people who have no investment in proving or disproving anything, who simply wake up with experiences that seem to defy explanation. And some of these reports are detailed enough and specific enough to make even hardened skeptics take notice. Consider what happened in one of the most unconventional experiments ever attempted in this field. When members of the Grateful Dead volunteered to participate in a dream telepathy study, researchers decided to think bigger. Instead of one sender trying to transmit images to one receiver, why not have thousands of people at a concert all focusing on the same image, all trying to send it to a sleeping subject miles away? The emotional intensity of a Grateful Dead concert, the researchers reasoned, might resemble the feeling tone that accompanies spontaneous telepathic experiences. Those moments when a parent dreams of their child in danger, at the exact moment something's actually happening. The collective focus of thousands of minds all pointing in the same direction might be more powerful than any individual attempt at dream transmission. The results were intriguing, though the pilot nature of the study and the small number of trials prevented definitive conclusions. But it highlighted something important about this field. Researchers were willing to think creatively, to explore possibilities that conventional science might dismiss out of hand. That creative thinking is becoming more important than ever because technology is opening doors that were previously locked tight. We're no longer limited to collecting stories and hoping for laboratory replication. We can actually monitor brain activity during sleep with unprecedented precision. We can track the specific neural networks that become active during different phases of dreaming. We can even begin to decode the content of dreams from brain activity patterns. And here's where things get really interesting for the future of shared dreaming research. A California-based neurotech startup called REMspace claims to have achieved something that sounds like science fiction: two-way communication between people during lucid dreams. Using advanced devices that can allegedly synchronize brainwave patterns between individuals, they report successful transmission of words and concepts between sleeping minds. The technology, they call it dream weaving, involves monitoring brain activity in real time and delivering carefully timed auditory cues through earbuds, while participants are in specific stages of sleep. The idea is to create a kind of technological bridge between sleeping minds, a way to artificially induce the kind of shared dreaming experiences that some people report happening naturally. Now, these claims haven't yet been peer-reviewed or independently verified, so we need to approach them with appropriate scientific skepticism. But they represent something important, a shift from studying naturally occurring shared dreams to potentially creating them artificially. If this technology works as claimed, it could finally provide the controlled, repeatable conditions necessary for rigorous scientific investigation. The neuroscience behind all of this is fascinating in its own right. During REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, specific brain regions become highly active. The limbic system, which processes emotions and memories, lights up like a Christmas tree. The visual cortex becomes engaged even though our eyes are closed. The thalamus, which normally acts as a gatekeeper for sensory information, begins sending the cortex a stream of internally generated images, sounds, and sensations. What's particularly intriguing is that the brain activity during REM sleep looks remarkably similar to waking consciousness in many ways. The same networks that process complex information while we're awake remain active while we dream. This suggests that the sleeping mind might be capable of more sophisticated processing than we previously assumed, perhaps sophisticated enough to engage in some form of communication with other minds, though the mechanism for such communication remains completely mysterious. Recent discoveries about sleep have revealed just how active and complex the sleeping brain really is. We now know that sleep facilitates memory consolidation through offline reactivations of memory traces. The brain doesn't simply shut down during sleep. It's actively reorganizing information, strengthening important memories, and discarding irrelevant details. Dreams themselves might be a byproduct of this memory consolidation process, a kind of conscious experience of the brain's nighttime housekeeping. But here's what makes the shared dreaming question so compelling. If dreams are primarily about memory consolidation and emotional processing, why would people in close relationships sometimes seem to process similar content? Are they dealing with shared emotional challenges that naturally lead to similar dream themes? Are they unconsciously picking up on each other's concerns and anxieties in ways that influence their sleep? Or is something more mysterious happening? The research into this question sits at the fascinating intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and consciousness studies. It forces us to ask fundamental questions about the nature of mind, the boundaries of individual consciousness, and the possibility that our brains might be capable of forms of communication that we don't yet understand. What we know for certain is that the human brain remains one of the most complex and mysterious objects in the known universe. We've mapped its structure, identified its major networks, and begun to understand how it processes information. But consciousness itself, the subjective experience of being aware, remains largely enigmatic. We don't fully understand how neural activity gives rise to conscious experience, let alone whether that experience can somehow extend beyond the boundaries of individual brains. And that's exactly where the story gets even more intriguing, because as we'll explore next, the question of shared dreaming isn't just about whether it's possible. It's about what it might mean for our understanding of consciousness, connection, and the very nature of human experience. The implications reach far beyond sleep science into territory that challenges some of our most basic assumptions about what it means to be human. The psychology of memory adds another layer of complexity to this puzzle that we simply can't ignore. When two people wake up claiming they've shared the same dream, we have to consider the possibility that memory itself might be playing tricks on us. Not maliciously, but in the subtle ways that human cognition naturally operates. Here's something that might surprise you. Every time you recall a memory, you're actually reconstructing it. Your brain isn't playing back a perfect recording like a video file. Instead, it's reassembling fragments of stored information, filling in gaps, and subtly influenced by your current mood, recent experiences, and social context. This process of memory reconstruction means that the act of discussing dreams with someone close to you can actually alter how you remember those dreams. Think about it this way. You wake up with fragments of a dream. Maybe you remember being in a house with blue walls and feeling anxious about something you can't quite identify. Later that morning, your partner mentions they dreamed about being trapped in a building. As you talk, your mind might unconsciously emphasize the similarities while downplaying the differences. The blue walls become more prominent in your memory. The anxiety transforms into feeling trapped. What started as two different dreams begins to look more and more alike with each telling. This isn't deliberate deception. It's the natural way human memory works, especially when we're emotionally invested in maintaining close relationships. The desire to feel connected to someone we care about can unconsciously influence how we process and remember our experiences. Psychologists call this cryptomnesia, when we unconsciously recall information and mistake it for original experience. But here's what makes this even more interesting. The very fact that we want to share dream experiences with people we're close to tells us something important about human nature. We're social creatures at the deepest level. Even in sleep, even in the most private corners of our consciousness, we seem to reach to a connection. The University of Minnesota research revealed something fascinating about this social dimension. Those reported shared dreams weren't randomly distributed across relationships. They clustered around the people who mattered most: family members, close friends, romantic partners. And they tended to happen during periods when the dreamers felt emotionally distant from each other, as if the sleeping mind was working to bridge gaps that waking life had created. This pattern suggests that shared dreaming reports might serve an important psychological function, regardless of whether they represent genuine telepathic communication. They might be the mind's way of processing relationship dynamics, working through emotional challenges, or maintaining connection across physical distance. The experience of believing you've shared a dream with someone can strengthen bonds, increase empathy, and create a sense of intimacy that has real value for the relationship. Recent research has actually demonstrated this empathy-building effect. When people share their dreams with others, both the teller and the listener show increased empathy toward each other. The simple act of describing a dream requires vulnerability. The act of listening requires imagination and emotional engagement. Even if the dreams weren't actually shared experiences, the process of discussing them creates genuine connection. This finding opens up an entirely different way of thinking about shared dreaming. Maybe the question isn't whether it's real in some objective sense. Maybe the question is what function it serves in human relationships and why our minds seem drawn to these experiences of apparent connection across the boundaries of individual consciousness. Cultural perspectives add yet another dimension to this puzzle. While Western science approaches shared dreaming with skepticism and demands for empirical proof, many other cultures around the world treat such experiences as normal and expected. Australian Aboriginal traditions include concepts of shared dreamtime experiences. Tibetan Buddhist practices involve dream yoga techniques that supposedly allow practitioners to enter and influence each other's dreams. Various indigenous cultures have specific practices designed to facilitate dream sharing within communities. These cultural differences highlight something important. Our beliefs and expectations might actually influence both the occurrence and interpretation of shared dream experiences. In cultures where such phenomena are considered natural, people might be more likely to notice, remember, and report them. In cultures that emphasize individual consciousness and scientific materialism, the same experiences might be dismissed or forgotten. This doesn't necessarily mean that belief creates the experiences out of nothing, but it might mean that our cultural framework shapes how we interpret ambiguous experiences. A vivid dream that contains elements similar to someone else's might be seen as coincidence in one culture and as evidence of spiritual connection in another. The role of individual differences is equally important to consider. Not everyone remembers their dreams with the same clarity or frequency. Some people wake up with detailed, vivid recollections of complex dream narratives. Others rarely remember dreaming at all. These differences in dream recall might influence who is most likely to report shared dreaming experiences. Personality factors also seem to play a role. People who score high on measures of creativity, openness to experience, and empathy are more likely to report unusual dream experiences, including apparent dream sharing. There's also something called boundary thinness, a psychological trait that describes people who have more permeable boundaries between different states of consciousness. These individuals might be more susceptible to experiences that blur the lines between self and other, between individual and shared awareness. The concept of boundary thinness is particularly intriguing because it suggests that the capacity for shared dreaming might not be equally distributed across the population. Just as some people are naturally better at music or mathematics, some individuals might be more naturally attuned to subtle forms of consciousness sharing. This doesn't prove that such sharing actually occurs, but it offers a framework for understanding why reports cluster around certain types of people and relationships. Sleep research has also revealed fascinating details about the timing of these reported experiences. Most claims of shared dreaming occur during REM sleep, the stage when dreams are most vivid and memorable. But REM sleep doesn't happen continuously throughout the night. It occurs in cycles with longer and more intense REM periods toward morning. This timing might be significant because it's when the brain is most active and when the boundary between sleep and waking consciousness is thinnest. The neuroscience of REM sleep shows us a brain that's almost as active as it is during waking hours. The visual cortex processes internally generated images. The emotional centers of the brain become highly engaged. The thalamus, which normally filters sensory input, begins sending streams of internally generated signals to the cortex. In many ways, the REM sleeping brain resembles a brain that's hallucinating, creating rich, complex experiences from internal neural activity. This level of neural complexity during dreaming suggests that the sleeping mind might be capable of more sophisticated processing than we typically assume, but it still doesn't explain how two separate brains could somehow coordinate their activities to produce similar dream content. The mechanism for such coordination remains completely mysterious from a conventional neuroscientific perspective, which brings us to some of the more speculative theories that researchers have proposed. Some have suggested that quantum mechanical effects in the brain might allow for forms of consciousness sharing that don't depend on conventional communication channels. The idea is that quantum entanglement, the phenomenon where particles can instantaneously affect each other across vast distances, might also apply to certain aspects of consciousness. This quantum consciousness theory is highly controversial and far from mainstream scientific acceptance. Most neuroscientists argue that the brain is too warm and noisy for quantum effects to play a meaningful role in consciousness. But a few researchers continue to explore the possibility, and the theory does offer a potential mechanism for shared consciousness experiences that wouldn't violate the laws of physics as we currently understand them. Another speculative approach involves the possibility that consciousness might not be entirely generated by individual brains. Some theories suggest that consciousness might be more like a field that individual brains access rather than something they produce. In this view, shared dreaming might occur when two brains temporarily access similar regions of this consciousness field. These ideas remain highly speculative and lack empirical support, but they illustrate the kinds of creative thinking that researchers are willing to explore when faced with phenomena that don't fit easily into conventional frameworks. The history of science is full of discoveries that once seemed impossible or ridiculous, so maintaining some openness to unusual possibilities might be important even when approaching them with appropriate skepticism. The technological approaches to studying and potentially creating shared dreaming experiences represent perhaps the most promising avenue for finally resolving these questions. Brain imaging technology has advanced dramatically in recent years. We can now monitor neural activity with remarkable precision and begin to decode the content of mental experiences from brain activity patterns. Some researchers are using this technology to study lucid dreaming, the state where people become aware that they're dreaming while still asleep. In lucid dreams, people can sometimes exert control over their dream experiences and even communicate with researchers through predetermined eye movements or facial expressions. This ability to maintain some conscious control and communication during dreaming opens up new possibilities for studying dream phenomena. Recent experiments have demonstrated can actually have them conversations with lucid dreamers, asking that researchers and receiving responses through eye movements while they remain asleep. The dreamers correctly answered questions about 18% of the time, which is far above chance levels. These findings prove that sophisticated communication with dreaming minds is possible, even if it doesn't directly demonstrate dream sharing between individuals. The implications of this lucid dreaming research extend beyond just communication. If people can maintain some level of conscious awareness and control during dreams, it might be possible to train individuals to seek out and potentially create shared dream experiences. Some practitioners of lucid dreaming claim they can deliberately enter shared dream spaces, though such claims remain unverified by controlled scientific studies. The technology for monitoring and potentially influencing brain states during sleep continues to advance rapidly. Brain-computer interfaces can now detect specific neural patterns associated with different types of mental activity. Transcranial stimulation techniques can influence brain activity in targeted regions. Real-time neurofeedback systems can help people learn to control their brain states with increasing precision. These technological capabilities raise the intriguing possibility that shared dreaming might eventually become possible, even if it doesn't occur naturally. By monitoring the brain states of two sleeping individuals and providing appropriate feedback or stimulation, researchers might be able to artificially synchronize their neural activity and create genuine, shared dream experiences. Such technology would finally allow for the kind of controlled, repeatable experiments necessary to definitively answer questions about shared dreaming. But it would also raise new questions about the nature of consciousness, the ethics of manipulating dream states, and what it means for human experience if the boundaries between individual minds can be technologically dissolved. The convergence of neuroscience, technology, and consciousness research is creating unprecedented opportunities to explore questions that have puzzled humanity for millennia. Whether shared dreaming occurs naturally or not, we may soon have the tools to create it artificially. And in doing so, we might finally understand something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself and the mysterious ways that human minds connect across the apparent boundaries of individual experience. The question of whether shared dreaming represents genuine telepathic communication or sophisticated psychological artifacts becomes even more complex when we consider the role of empathy in human relationships. There's something profound happening in the space between minds, something that might not require supernatural explanation, but is no less remarkable for being rooted in ordinary human psychology. Recent research has revealed that people who report shared dreaming experiences often score higher on measures of empathy than the general population. They're more attuned to the emotional states of others, more sensitive to subtle social cues, more likely to unconsciously mirror the feelings and concerns of people they care about. This empathetic sensitivity might create a kind of psychological resonance that influences dream content in ways we're only beginning to understand. When you're deeply connected to someone, you absorb their worries, their joys, their unspoken anxieties. You notice when they're stressed about work, even when they haven't explicitly told you. You pick up on relationship tensions, financial concerns, health fears. These shared emotional landscapes might naturally give rise to similar dream themes, not through telepathic transmission, but through the kind of deep knowing that comes from truly caring about another person. The timing patterns we discussed earlier support this interpretation. Shared dreams cluster around periods of emotional distance when the normal channels of communication have been disrupted. It's as if the dreaming mind is working overtime to process the relationship dynamics that waking consciousness hasn't fully addressed. The dreams become a bridge, a way of maintaining connection when direct communication has become difficult. This doesn't diminish the significance of these experiences. If anything, it makes them more beautiful, more human. The idea that our minds are so deeply interconnected that we process each other's emotional worlds, even in sleep, speaks to something fundamental about what it means to be social creatures. We are not isolated islands of consciousness. We are part of an intricate web of relationships that shapes our inner lives in ways both subtle and profound. But there's another layer to consider, one that takes us deeper into the mystery of consciousness itself. Even if shared dreaming can be explained through conventional psychology and neuroscience, the fact that consciousness exists at all remains one of the most profound puzzles in science. How does the electrical activity of neural networks give rise to subjective experience? How does matter become aware of itself? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, and it's a problem that shared dreaming research touches in unexpected ways. If consciousness is somehow more than just brain activity, if it has properties or dimensions we don't yet understand, then phenomena like shared dreaming might offer glimpses into those hidden aspects of mind. Consider what we know about the boundaries of individual consciousness. During normal waking states, you experience yourself as separate from others, contained within your own skin, looking out at the world through your own eyes. But these boundaries aren't as fixed as they seem. Meditation practitioners report states where the sense of self dissolves into something larger. People in deep states of empathy describe feeling merged with others' experiences. Even ordinary emotions like love can create moments where the boundaries between self and other seem to blur. If consciousness has this kind of flexibility, this capacity to extend beyond individual boundaries, then perhaps shared dreaming represents an extreme expression of a more general phenomenon. Not telepathy in some supernatural sense, but a natural extension of the ways that consciousness can connect and overlap in extraordinary circumstances. The research on mirror neurons adds another piece to this puzzle. These specialized brain cells fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing the same action. They create a kind of neural resonance, allowing you to literally feel what others are experiencing. Mirror neurons are thought to be crucial for empathy, social learning, and our ability to understand the mental states of others. What if similar neural mechanisms operate during sleep? What if the mirror systems in our brains remain active during dreaming? creating resonance patterns that could influence dream content. Two people who are emotionally connected might develop synchronized neural patterns that persist even during sleep, leading to similar dream experiences without requiring any exotic form of communication. This neural resonance theory is speculative, but it offers a bridge between the seemingly impossible claims of dream sharing and the known mechanisms of brain function. It suggests that shared dreaming might be a rare but natural expression of the same neural systems that allow us to connect with others during waking life. The therapeutic implications of this perspective are fascinating. Whether or not shared dreams represent genuine telepathic communication, the experience of believing you've shared a dream with someone creates measurable psychological benefits. People report feeling more connected, more understood, more emotionally intimate with their dream-sharing partners. Some therapists have begun incorporating dream sharing into their practice, not because they believe in telepathic dreaming, but because the process of sharing and discussing dreams creates powerful opportunities for emotional connection and insight. When couples or family members explore their dreams together, they often discover shared concerns, parallel anxieties, and complementary perspectives that weren't visible in ordinary conversation. The simple act of describing a dream requires vulnerability. Dreams are strange, personal, often embarrassing or confusing. Sharing them with another person is an act of trust. And listening to someone's dreams requires imagination, patience, and emotional engagement. The process creates intimacy regardless of whether the dreams were actually shared in some objective sense. This therapeutic dimension highlights something important about human nature. We are meaning-making creatures. We create narratives to make sense of our experiences. We find patterns in chaos. We construct connections even where none may objectively exist. But these constructed meanings aren't false or worthless. They become part of our lived reality, shaping how we relate to ourselves and others. The question then becomes not whether shared dreaming is real in some absolute sense, but what function it serves in human life, and why our minds seem drawn to these experiences of connection across the boundaries of individual consciousness. Even if shared dreams are psychological constructions rather than telepathic communications, they reveal something profound about our need for connection and our capacity for empathy. The cultural dimension adds yet another layer of richness to this story. In many traditions around the world, dream sharing is considered a normal part of spiritual and social life. Aboriginal Australian cultures have elaborate concepts of shared dreamtime experiences that connect individuals not just to each other, but to the land, to ancestors, to the deeper rhythms of existence. These cultural practices often involve specific techniques for inducing and sharing dream experiences. Tibetan dream yoga includes methods for maintaining consciousness during sleep and deliberately entering shared dream spaces. Various shamanic traditions use drumming, chanting, and other techniques to synchronize the consciousness of group members and facilitate shared visionary experiences. From the perspective of these traditions, the Western scientific demand for proof misses the point entirely. The value of dream sharing lies not in its objective reality, but in its capacity to create connection, meaning, and spiritual insight. The experiences are real in the sense that they transform the people who have them, regardless of whether they can be measured and verified by external observers. This cultural perspective challenges us to think more broadly about what we mean by reality and truth. Science excels at describing the physical world and testing hypotheses about objective phenomena, but human experience includes dimensions that resist easy quantification, subjective realities that matter deeply to the people who live them, even if they can't be captured in laboratory conditions. The debate over shared dreaming reflects this larger tension between scientific materialism and experiential knowing. Both perspectives offer valuable insights, but neither alone captures the full complexity of consciousness and human connection. Perhaps the most fruitful approach is to hold space for both, to pursue rigorous scientific investigation while remaining open to the possibility that some aspects of consciousness might extend beyond what current science can measure or explain. The personal accounts of shared dreaming experiences often have a quality that transcends simple anecdote. People describe not just similar dream content, but a sense of presence, of meeting the other person in a space that felt more real than ordinary dreams. They report conversations, shared activities, mutual recognition that carried over into waking life. The consistency of these reports across cultures and throughout history suggests that something significant is happening, even if we don't yet understand what. These experiences often have profound effects on the people who have them. Relationships deepen, understanding increases. Sometimes healing occurs in ways that seem impossible to explain through conventional psychology alone. A grieving person dreams of a deceased loved one and wakes with a sense of peace that therapy hadn't been able to provide. Estranged family members share a dream that leads to reconciliation. Partners on the verge of separation experience dream connections that revive their relationship. The transformative power of these experiences points to something important about consciousness and connection that we're still trying to understand. Whether they represent genuine telepathic communication or sophisticated psychological phenomena, they reveal capacities of mind and relationship that deserve serious attention and study. As we continue to develop more sophisticated tools for studying consciousness and sleep, we may eventually answer the question of whether shared dreaming is objectively real. Brain imaging technology continues to advance. Our understanding of neural networks deepens. Artificial intelligence might soon help us decode dream content with unprecedented precision. But even if we solve the technical questions, the deeper mysteries will remain. How does consciousness arise from matter? What are the limits of individual awareness? How do minds connect across the apparent boundaries of separate brains? These questions touch the very heart of what it means to be human, what it means to be conscious, what it means to exist in relationship with others. The phenomenon of shared dreaming, whether real or imagined, opens a window into these fundamental mysteries. It challenges our assumptions about the boundaries of self and other, about the nature of consciousness, about the possibility of connection beyond ordinary communication. It invites us to consider that reality might be stranger and more wonderful than our current scientific models suggest. And in that invitation lies perhaps the greatest value of exploring these questions. Not to prove or disprove any particular theory, but to expand our sense of what might be possible, to deepen our appreciation for the mysteries of consciousness, and to remember that human experience includes dimensions that science is still working to understand. The sleeping mind remains one of the great frontiers of consciousness research. Every night, for roughly 8 hours, we enter an altered state where the normal rules of logic and physics seem suspended. We visit impossible places, meet people who couldn't exist, experience emotions more intense than waking life typically provides, and sometimes, if the reports are to be believed, we meet each other there, in that strange liminal space between consciousness and unconsciousness. Whether those meetings are real in some objective sense or products of our deep need for connection, they remind us that consciousness is far stranger and more wonderful than we typically imagine. They point toward possibilities that hover at the edges of current scientific understanding, waiting perhaps for new tools, new theories, new ways of thinking about what it means to be aware, to dream, to exist in relationship with others. The question of shared dreaming remains open, suspended between skepticism and wonder, between the demand for proof and the recognition that some aspects of human experience might always remain mysteriously beyond the reach of complete explanation. And perhaps that's exactly where the most interesting questions belong, in that twilight zone where science meets mystery and the sleeping mind continues to surprise us with its endless capacity for connection, creativity, and profound strangeness. The technology that's emerging around dream research is opening doors we never knew existed. Real-time brain monitoring during sleep can now track the precise moments when different neural networks activate. When the visual cortex begins processing internally generated images, when the emotional centers of the brain light up with the intensity of waking experiences. We're beginning to map the geography of the sleeping mind with unprecedented detail. What's particularly fascinating is how this technology is revealing the complexity of what happens during those 8 hours of unconsciousness. The brain isn't simply shutting down for the night. It's running elaborate processes, consolidating memories, processing emotions, creating rich narratives from fragments of experience. The sleeping mind is arguably more active than the waking one, just active in ways we're only beginning to understand. This technological revolution in sleep research is creating possibilities that would have seemed like pure science fiction just a decade ago. Researchers can now detect when someone is entering a lucid dream state, that rare condition where dreamers become aware they're dreaming while remaining asleep. They can communicate with these lucid dreamers through carefully timed audio cues, asking questions and receiving responses through predetermined eye movements or facial expressions. The success of these lucid dreaming communication experiments proves something remarkable. The boundary between the sleeping and waking mind is far more permeable than we previously imagined. If researchers can have conversations with sleeping people, if dreamers can maintain enough conscious awareness to answer mathematical questions while deep in REM sleep, then perhaps more complex forms of dream interaction are possible than we've ever considered. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn towards something that sounds almost too strange to believe. Some researchers are now working on technologies that could theoretically synchronize brain activity between sleeping individuals. Not just monitor it, but actively influence it, creating artificial bridges between dreaming minds. The concept involves using real-time brain monitoring to detect specific neural patterns associated with dream content, then using various forms of stimulation to guide sleeping brains towards similar patterns. Imagine 2 people sleeping in separate rooms, their brain activity being monitored and subtly influenced to encourage synchronized dreaming experiences. It's like technological telepathy, but grounded in neuroscience rather than mysticism. These approaches are still experimental, still unproven, still requiring peer review and replication, but they represent a fundamental shift in how we think about consciousness and the possibility of shared mental experiences. Instead of waiting for naturally occurring shared dreams to study, we might soon be able to create them deliberately, under controlled conditions that could finally answer the questions that have puzzled researchers for over a century. The implications extend far beyond just understanding shared dreaming. If consciousness can be technologically synchronized, if the boundaries between individual minds can be temporarily dissolved through artificial means, what does that mean for our understanding of personal identity, privacy, and the nature of individual experience? We might be approaching a future where the line between self and other becomes negotiable, where consciousness itself becomes something that can be shared rather than simply experienced in isolation. Yet even as technology advances, the human dimension of these experiences remains central to understanding their significance. The people who report shared dreaming experiences don't just describe similar dream content. They describe a quality of connection, a sense of presence that goes beyond mere coincidence or psychological suggestion. Listen to how they describe these encounters. They speak of meeting each other in dream spaces that felt more vivid and real than ordinary dreams. They describe conversations that continued themes from waking life, collaborative activities that neither could have imagined alone, moments of recognition and connection that carried profound emotional weight. The consistency of these descriptions across cultures, relationships, and decades suggests something significant is happening, something that deserves serious attention, regardless of its ultimate explanation. The therapeutic applications of this research are already beginning to emerge. Some practitioners are incorporating dream sharing techniques into couples therapy, family counseling, and grief work. Not because they necessarily believe in telepathic dreaming, but because the process of exploring and sharing dream experiences creates opportunities for connection and understanding that traditional talk therapy sometimes can't reach. When people share their dreams with others, especially with people they care about, measurable changes occur in their relationship dynamics. Empathy increases, emotional intimacy deepens. Understanding grows in ways that can be tracked and measured, regardless of whether the dreams were actually shared in some objective sense. The psychological benefits are real and significant, pointing to deep human needs for connection that dreams somehow help fulfill. This brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of the entire phenomenon: the role that emotional connection plays in reported shared dreaming experiences. The University of Minnesota research revealed that these experiences cluster around specific types of relationships and specific emotional circumstances. They don't occur randomly. They follow patterns that suggest deeper psychological and social processes at work. The fact that shared dreams most often occur between people who are emotionally close but physically separated suggests that these experiences might serve a function in maintaining psychological bonds across distance. When normal communication is disrupted, when relationship tensions create emotional distance, the dreaming mind might be working overtime to preserve connection through the only channels available to it. This interpretation doesn't require telepathic communication to explain the reported phenomena. It suggests instead that our minds are so deeply interconnected through empathy, shared experience, and emotional resonance that similar concerns and anxieties naturally surface in our dreams. When two people are dealing with the same relationship issues, facing similar life challenges, or processing comparable emotional material, their dreams might naturally converge around common themes and concerns. The timing of these experiences adds another layer of meaning to the story. Shared dreams don't typically occur during periods of closeness and harmony. They cluster around moments of separation, tension, or emotional distance. It's as if the unconscious mind is reaching across the gaps that waking life has created, working to maintain bonds that conscious interaction has been unable to preserve. This pattern suggests that shared dreaming reports might represent a kind of psychological healing process, a way that deeply connected individuals continue to work through relationship dynamics, even when they're unable to communicate directly. The dreams become a bridge, a form of connection that doesn't depend on physical proximity or conscious intention. The individual differences in who reports these experiences are equally revealing. People who score high on measures of empathy, creativity, and openness to experience are more likely to report shared dreaming encounters. Those with what psychologists call thin boundaries, people who have more permeable psychological barriers between different states of consciousness, also show higher rates of these reports. These personality factors suggest that the capacity for shared dreaming experiences, whether real or imagined, might not be equally distributed across the population. Some individuals might be naturally more attuned to subtle forms of psychological connection, more sensitive to the emotional states of others, more likely to notice and remember experiences that blur the boundaries between self and other. The concept of boundary thinness is particularly fascinating because it connects shared dreaming reports to a broader range of consciousness phenomena. People with thin boundaries are also more likely to report mystical experiences, creative insights, and other forms of altered consciousness. They seem to have minds that are naturally more flexible, more open to experiences that don't fit into conventional categories of understanding. This doesn't necessarily validate shared dreaming as a genuine telepathic phenomenon, but it does suggest that certain individuals might be more naturally equipped to have experiences that feel like consciousness sharing, whether through heightened empathy, unconscious communication, or genuine psychic connection. The cultural context continues to play a crucial role in shaping both the occurrence and interpretation of these experiences. In societies where dream sharing is considered normal and expected, people are more likely to remember, discuss, and value apparent shared dreaming encounters. In cultures that emphasize individual consciousness and scientific skepticism, the same experiences might be dismissed or quickly forgotten. This cultural influence creates a complex feedback loop. Belief shapes experience, but experience also shapes belief. People who have compelling shared dreaming encounters often become more open to possibilities they previously dismissed. Skeptics who experience vivid dream connections sometimes find their worldview fundamentally challenged by experiences that don't fit into their existing frameworks. The interplay between belief and experience raises important questions about the nature of consciousness and reality itself. If our expectations and cultural conditioning influence what we perceive and remember, how do we distinguish between genuine phenomena and psychologically constructed experiences? And does that distinction matter if the psychological effects are real and meaningful? These questions become even more complex when we consider the role of memory in shaping dream reports. Every time we recall a dream, we're reconstructing it from fragments of stored information. The process of sharing dreams with others can influence how we remember those experiences, potentially creating apparent similarities that weren't present in the original dreams. Yet the detailed specificity of many shared dreaming reports challenges simple explanations based on memory distortion or suggestion. When people describe identical architectural details, matching color schemes, or precisely corresponding narrative elements, the odds against coincidental similarity become quite high. Something is creating these correspondences, whether psychological or psychic. The investigation of shared dreaming has evolved into something much larger than a simple question about telepathic communication. It has become an exploration of consciousness itself, of the boundaries between individual minds, of the ways that human beings connect across the apparent separations of space and individual experience. Whether shared dreaming represents genuine telepathic communication, sophisticated psychological phenomena, or some combination of both, it points toward capacities of consciousness that we're still working to understand. The sleeping mind remains one of the great frontiers of human experience, a realm where the ordinary rules seem suspended and extraordinary possibilities hover just beyond the edge of scientific explanation. As we continue to develop more sophisticated tools for studying consciousness, we may eventually resolve the technical questions about shared dreaming. But the deeper mysteries will remain. How does awareness arise from matter? What are the limits of individual consciousness? How do minds connect across the boundaries of separate brains and bodies? These questions touch the very heart of what it means to be human, what it means to be conscious, what it means to exist in relationship with others. They challenge our assumptions about the nature of reality and invite us to consider possibilities that current science can barely imagine, let alone explain, and perhaps that's exactly where the most profound questions belong, suspended between knowledge and mystery, between the demand for proof and the recognition that consciousness itself might be stranger and more wonderful than our current theories suggest. In that space of uncertainty lies the invitation to remain curious, to stay open to experiences that don't fit our existing categories, and to remember that the sleeping mind continues to surprise us with its endless capacity for connection, creativity, and profound mystery. The phenomenon of shared dreaming, whatever its ultimate explanation, serves as a reminder that human consciousness includes dimensions that science is still working to map and understand. It points toward possibilities that hover at the edges of current knowledge, waiting perhaps for new tools, new theories, new ways of thinking about the nature of awareness and the mysterious ways that minds connect across the vast spaces that seem to separate us. In the end, the question isn't just whether people can share the same dream, it's what these experiences, real or imagined, tell us about the deepest needs and capacities of human consciousness. They speak to our profound desire for connection, our capacity for empathy, and our willingness to reach toward each other, even across the boundaries of sleep and dreams. Whether that reaching succeeds in ways that transcend ordinary psychology remains one of the great open questions of consciousness research. But the reaching itself, the persistent human impulse to connect and share even our most private experiences, reveals something beautiful about what it means to be conscious beings navigating this strange and wonderful existence together. The sleeping mind keeps its secrets well, but it also keeps offering us glimpses of possibilities we're only beginning to understand. In those glimpses lies perhaps the greatest gift that shared dreaming research can offer. Not definitive answers, but deeper questions, richer mysteries, and an expanded sense of what consciousness might be capable of when it reaches beyond the boundaries of individual experience towards something larger, stranger, and more connected than we typically dare to imagine. So here we are, at the quiet edge of a question that refuses to be fully answered. We've wandered through laboratories and cultural traditions, through brain scans and personal accounts, through the tangled relationships between memory and meaning, between science and experience. And what have we found? Not certainty, but something perhaps more valuable. A deeper appreciation for the mystery of consciousness itself, and the profound ways that human minds reach toward each other, even in sleep. The question of whether people can truly share the same dream remains beautifully, stubbornly open. The evidence points in multiple directions. The laboratory studies offer intriguing hints, but fail to provide the replicable proof that science demands. The personal accounts carry emotional weight and detailed specificity, but resist objective verification. The cultural traditions honor these experiences as meaningful regardless of their material reality. The neuroscience reveals a sleeping brain far more complex and active than we ever imagined, yet still can't explain how separate minds might somehow meet in dream space. Perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Some questions serve us better by remaining questions, by keeping alive our sense of wonder about consciousness and connection. Whether shared dreaming represents genuine telepathic communication or the beautiful workings of empathy and memory, it reminds us that we are not isolated islands of awareness. We are part of something larger, more interconnected, more mysterious than our daily lives typically reveal. Tonight, when you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, carry with you this possibility, that in that strange liminal space between waking and sleeping, between self and other, something remarkable might be happening. Something that connects us across distance, across difference, across the apparent boundaries of individual experience. Sweet dreams, fellow travelers. And if you happen to meet someone else out there in the landscape of sleep, remember that whether it's telepathy or psychology, miracle or memory, you're participating in one of the most beautiful aspects of being human. The endless, mysterious, wonderful capacity to reach toward each other, even in our dreams. Toward each other, even in our dreams.